He's a journalist writing for the British newspaper The Independent. He's an author of numerous books that are bestsellers, and he's a person that is never shy with his opinions. It's Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk, thank you for joining us. My first question, Robert, is that you use the word justice all the time in your writings. How can we use the word justice, its meaning, and understand the very different conflicts that are in the greater Middle East and beyond?
Well, I think there are two issues here. You know, the first one is that after the First World War, the victors, who were primarily the British and the French, the victors created the modern Middle East. They drew the borders. And I've spent my entire professional career out here watching the people on those borders burn. The borders are artificial. We never want the Arab world, or the Middle East in general, including Iran and Afghanistan, to have the freedom to make their own decisions. You know, everybody in this region, the Kurds in Turkey, the Armenians who were driven out of Turkey in the First World War after the genocide, the Palestinians in what we still call Palestine in quotation marks, or Israel if you wish, many of the people who live in Jordan, who regard themselves as being the same tribe as the people in Iraq. You have the same sort of situation in Afghanistan between the Pashtuns of Pakistan and the Pashtuns of Afghanistan. We created borders to divide these people, not to bring them together. And we haven't ever given them the opportunity to have real nation states. We always want to come and liberate them and give them democracy. And we always arrive with our tanks, our helicopters, our armoured personnel carriers and our soldiers, instead of arriving with our teachers, our educators, our doctors and our social carers. We always come with soldiers. We always come to impose the society we believe these people should have. And they don't, you know, they'd like some of our democracy off our supermarket shelves. And they'd like some human rights too. But the freedom they ask for is the freedom to make their own choices. And this we do not give them. And that is why they ask for justice.
Robert, the Israeli government continues to talk about some kind of moratorium on settlements in the West Bank, but they continue to build, even though the Obama administration is against this. Do you feel that the U.S. government has let the Palestinian people down after the speech he made in Cairo?
Look, I was present for the wonderful speech in Cairo, and I didn't think it was that wonderful. Some of the phrases he used about the Palestinians were very, very soft and careful. And I didn't get the impression that he was really going to be able to put pressure on the Israelis to stop the settlements. You know, you've got to realize, I think Obama is a very smart guy. His books, at least he wrote himself. They're real books. They're not books ghost-written like Hillary Clinton's book was. But the thing is that government is not about nice guys. Government is primarily about power and the use of power. And the power of the Israeli lobby, or as I call it, the Likud lobby, because it's really the lobby for the right-wing Israelis in government, is such that you cannot have a single president change that round. It's not going to alter. The fact that many Americans realize that following Israel's policy, or allowing Israel to follow its own policy, contrary to American wishes, is not necessarily in the interests of the United States, doesn't change that. Because in Congress and the Senate, Israel's power is immensely strong. They can make and break American politicians. And Mr. Obama can make the most beautiful speeches, he can make the most eloquent speeches, he can mean what he says. But at the end of the day, government is about power, not about nice people.
Well, this leads me to ask, I mean, if the equation is peace for land, and there's no land, how can there be peace? It seems this equation completely falls apart, again, because of the settlements.
Look, I have this argument with Israelis and with Jewish supporters of Israel around the world. It is my view that the only possible peace for the future must be based, as all these processes are supposed to be based, on UN Security Council Resolution 242, which followed the '67 war and demanded the withdrawal of military forces from territories occupied in that war in return for the recognition of security of all states in the area, including Israel. But you see, such is the extent of, let's use the word, colony building for Jews and Jews only on Arab land, that it's almost impossible to go back to 242. And unless you have 242 as the basis for peace, I don't think there'll be a peace. And the real question for Israelis in government, and there's plenty of Israelis who agree with what I'm saying, of course, but they're probably a minority. The real question for Israel in government is, do you want land or do you want peace? If you want land, you will not have peace. You might get the land, but you won't have peace. If you want peace, it's got to be international frontiers, not the frontiers placed down artificially by the Israeli government by seizing and, let's speak frankly, stealing, in international law, other people's land.
Of course, Robert, in your writings, you're very critical of the Israeli government and its decisions and the U.S. backing of Israel, but you're also very hard on Arab governments as well. They need to be just as responsible in attaining what you call justice.
Look, the Arab world has a whole series of problems. Corruption is the cancer that eats through all Arab countries. I have to say it doesn't leave the Israeli leadership untainted either, but the Arab world, it is the cancer of corruption that gnaws away at it. There is no serious democracy, except perhaps where I am now, a kind of para-democracy, a half-democracy in Lebanon. It is a land ruled by secret policemen, where torture chambers are the ultimate fear of every individual citizen. But you know, this myth of Arab unity, ittihad in Arabic, has been around for a long time, and the Arabs are not united. They are different peoples. The frontiers may not represent the difference between various tribes, but they are different peoples, to the point of view, for example, that an Arab in Lebanon usually can't understand an Arab speaking Arabic in Algeria. They often have to speak in French together. So, you know, there are huge differences, but one of the things you should remember is that after the First World War, while the French and the British were dividing up the Middle East, the Americans, these are the State Department officials to the dying Ottoman Empire, and the NGOs, which, of course, at the time we would have called missionaries, all asked the United States to create one modern Arab state from the border of Persia, Iran, and Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq, all the way to the Atlantic coast in Morocco, to make it a modern Arab state. And we, the British and the French, didn't want that. We wanted bits of it who would always have to rely on us for support. And that's pretty much what has come about. The American dream of having one modern Arab nation was a good one. And it was a moment when, if he had the power, President Wilson, after the First World War, might have been able to create that. But alas, he could no more do that than he could create a proper large state for the Armenians after their genocide. So I think that, you know, you're dealing with a whole series of totally artificial countries. And one of the problems is that because the Arabs feel themselves always under pressure, it's like the enemy are at the gates. And when the enemy are at the gates, you don't start questioning your society or questioning the powers or behaviour of your rulers. You have to stand firm. So we have this endless thing about Arab unity. The Syrians always call themselves al-Arabiya Wahda, the mother of one Arab nation. And it's rubbish. They're not. But you know, one of the other problems is that when you don't really have nation states, people are always going to be loyal to their tribe or to their village or to their town or to their religious sectarian groupings than they are to our idea of a nation state.
Let's turn to the issue of Afghanistan. Are you disappointed, surprised that Obama seems to be trying to repeat what George Bush did in Iraq with the so-called surge? Will this policy work out?
Look, I'm amazed that Obama has seized on Afghanistan as a war to win. There's a cliche that it's the graveyard of empires. The problem is that the cliche is true. You know, the British in 1842, the British in the 1880s, the Soviets from 1979 to 1989, now the Americans and the British. We lose, we lose, we lose. We always lose in Afghanistan because we're always propping up new governments. Hamid Karzai has just had a totally fraudulent election, and we hope he wins, or we hope he hasn't won, or do we? And who are we going to support again? And, you know, at the end of the day, I think one of the problems of people like Barack Obama, who is a nice guy, I mean, after all, after George Bush, anyone would be, is that we still feel that we are the superior people, that we must teach the other people how to live their lives. But you see, if you have an NGO, for example, go into an Afghan village and announce that there must be equality of education between men and women, the men will see this as an attack on their society, their culture and their religion. At the end of the day, they are the ones who are going to have to come to this decision. And if the delay takes another century, we Westerners have to put up with that. The real problem, I think, is you see, you can no more convince a country like Afghanistan to behave as we want them to behave than you could persuade Peter the Great in the benefits of parliamentary democracy. It just won't work. You can't do it. These people have got to learn themselves how they should run their society fairly. We cannot march in as Westerners, I was going to say as Christians, but there aren't many Christians left now, but certainly as Westerners, and tell them what to do. It doesn't work.
Now let's turn to Iran. The Obama administration said it wanted to improve relations with Tehran, but over the last few days we've seen a lot of turbulence. Where do you think this is going to go?
Look, Obama got it right when he referred to the injustice that America had inflicted on Iran at the time of Mossadegh in the 50s, when the CIA and the British Secret Service staged a coup to get rid of one of the only democratically elected leaders of Iran, Mossadegh, and put the Shah back on his throne with all his secret policemen and his soldiers and so on. And these are wounds that go very deep, and one speech and two speeches is not going to solve that. And many times in the recent past, Iran has reached out to America with positive ideas, including ideas about Afghanistan. Remember, the Taliban are as much an enemy of Iran, they used to call them the Black Taliban, as they are of America. And over again, under Bush, the United States rejected this. One of the key points with Iran was that they did have a very fine man, Mohammed Khatami, who's now in the opposition, of course, who was the president. He reached out to America in the same way Obama wants to reach out to Iran, and he was slapped down. We weren't interested in dealing with Khatami. So what happened? Ahmadinejad becomes the president. And now he's the president again. Whether he actually is the president depends on whether you believe the election results. So in a sense, you see, politics goes in such a way that people keep slapping each other down. What can Obama do now? I don't think he can do anything. I don't think, frankly, that the Iranians really want a bomb. And if they got one, I don't think they'd use it. I mean, there is a country, a Muslim country, filled with fanatics, which does have a bomb, and it's called Pakistan. But we still are obsessed with Iran. And anyway, are we going to go on for the rest of our lives and generation after generation saying, well, they can have a bomb because they're on our side, they can have a bomb because they're on our side in the war of terror, oh, they can't have a bomb, there's far too many clergymen in that government. I mean, we can't do that. At the end of the day, every country will be able, if it wants, to get nuclear weapons. But I don't think Iran would ever use them. Anyway, it's not up to people like Ahmadinejad to make such decisions, because if Iran used nuclear weapons, say, against Israel, it would destroy all the Palestinians, and the Israelis would respond by destroying Tehran. And the Iranians are not stupid. These are wise people, and they don't want to go to war, and they're not going to go to war.
Robert, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it here. We only covered a few topics. We could cover so much more, but I hope you'll join us again here on RT.